you, and welcome back to another episode of the Miss Michaela Mae Show and the Western Hippie Podcast. This is another episode that is going to be cross-posted to both episodes because today the topic we are going to talk about is quitting caffeine. And this was something I wanted to share on Miss Michaela Mae as my own personal journey, but I also wanted to share it on the Western Hippie Podcast because it is related to healing the body. And so the reason that I wanted to make this episode is I have not had caffeine since I've had caffeine twice since the first week of August. And it was an accident. I ordered a coffee for my birthday in September, forgot to say decaf. And then I've had a matcha one other time. And other than that, I have not had caffeine since the first week of August. And this was a lot more life-changing and a lot more of a healing and spiritual experience than I expected it to be. It was one of those things where I thought I was quitting caffeine to see just how it would go, and I had intuitively felt the call to quit caffeine for a while. I did not expect the journey that I was about to go on, especially in the first 3 weeks after. It was very fascinating. So I just wanted to get into it and tell you my experience, how I did it, why I did it, what's happened since then. And one of my big goals with any kind of content I create or anything that I do, and if you hear some noises in the background, I have my corgis Tank and Willie with me, and Tank, we don't know if this is it, but we joke that Tank has a deviated septum because every time he breathes, everyone thinks he's growling, but it's just all the time. So if that's what you hear, it's a Tank. But one of my goals in any kind of content I create or in anything I do, one of my highest values is how we think is greater than what we think. So it's way more important to me, not just for myself, but whoever I'm talking to, for them to be able to explain how they drew their conclusion than what their conclusion actually is. And so my goal with this episode today is just to lay out why I did it, what I did, how I did, etc. And then also in telling you my experience, give you these factors and these components in my experience. And so then you can start to decide, is this something I should even consider? Because maybe you do better on caffeine. Something that I talked about in my last episode of the Miss Michaela Mae Show is once we realize we're going in the wrong direction, and no, we're not talking about driving, it is okay to turn around. And so just like with my Miss Michaela Mae Show, I thought that I would do better creating content every single day. And in fact, I didn't. It wore me out. And I do a lot better with batch, doing content, making podcasts in batches and then not having to think about recording for the rest of the week. And so I got not far, but I got 9 days into something and I decided to turn around. And so just like with coffee, this is what I tell myself: if you get a couple weeks into it and you decide it's not your thing, it's okay to turn around. So the first thing I want to get into is why I did it. And specifically, I had just kind of intuitively felt like I wanted to feel my body off caffeine because I'd heard stories of people quitting caffeine. And then when they went back on caffeine, it was a very interesting experience because they had kind of gotten numb to caffeine. And so when they had a withdrawal from caffeine for a long period of time, when they went back on it, they actually got to see how their body reacted to it, because in fact, it wasn't that caffeine wasn't working for them. They had just built up a tolerance and a resistance. So I had heard a couple stories like that, and that really inspired me to just try what it was like to not have caffeine for a while. And then the second thing was I heard a podcast, which I will link this podcast below because I really highly encourage anyone to go listen to it, from a lady named Dr. Callie Estes, I want to say it's pronounced. And she was on a podcast, and she is a sober, her company is called Sober on Demand. I think she calls herself a sober and detox coach. I can't remember the exact term. So, but I'll link the episode below. But she was on this podcast talking about her story, and she was talking about how her husband was kind of a casual cocaine user before he really, he did end up getting really addicted. But before he got super addicted, he was just kind of the way that this is not necessarily exactly what she said, but the way I interpreted it, it was the same thing as like someone going to have a beer, like out to dinner with their buddies every other week. Like sometimes her husband would just do a quick line of Coke, like before he was a musician, before he'd go play at a show. She was like, it wasn't a big deal. And so people would give her crap, like, okay, you're a sober on demand, like you're a sober coach or addiction specialist, and your husband does like Coke every now and again. She's like, you have no, and she's very blunt. She's from the East Coast and she's very blunt and very straight to the point. And she's like, you're not sober either. Like you're jacked up on sugar, you're jacked up on caffeine. Most people are jacked up on SSRI meds and they're giving the person that does Coke once a month like a big deal when you're doing all that stuff every single day. And that just hit me like a truck. I was like, oh my gosh, I am like jacked up on all these substances. Like a lot of us, this is one thing that I've been sitting with for a long time is addiction is not the what, but the why. So for some people, working out can be just as bad of an addiction as somebody else with alcohol, where someone who drinks time to time may actually have a healthier relationship with alcohol than somebody else does with going to the gym. And I've been very much studying like the why of addiction instead of the what of addiction. And so it was an ego hit for me, honestly, because one of the things I pride myself on is like, I don't have an issue with alcohol. I don't have an issue with this. I don't have an issue with that. But I did, prior to me doing that, like quitting caffeine, I did have a really bad relationship with caffeine, but also with sugar. And sugar is the next thing that I'm going to weed out. But I wanted to start with caffeine. And so it just like hit me, in the words of Miley Cyrus, it hit me like a wrecking ball. I was like, oh crap. She's right. I do not have a healthy relationship with caffeine. And this is something I'm addicted to. And this is something I'm using as like an escape loop. And so in that, I was like, okay, I've got to do something about it. So those were the main things that led me to like, okay, I want to quit caffeine and I want to see how I do without caffeine. So that was my main why behind quitting caffeine. And then there is one thing before I go into the how I quit caffeine that I want to explain. And the other why was like what I do for work really requires me to be in tune with my body. And I just had this feeling that caffeine was disconnecting me from my body and my own intuition. And yeah, that was why caffeine, that piece right there was the reason caffeine was quitting caffeine was more of a slap in the face than I thought it was going to be. So we'll get into that later. But that was the third reason. And not only was my hunch right, but it was very, very correct and very, very accurate that caffeine was disconnecting me from my own body. So those are the main reasons. And so the how that I did it, the one thing that I was I knew was going to be hard is I had such a routine because my friend owns the local coffee shop where I live. And it's not just like going to get caffeine. It's also seeing my friend. It's also having like, I work from home alone. So it's also a little bit of socialization first thing in the morning. So I knew it would be really, really hard to just like cold turkey break that routine. And so I knew we were going on vacation the first week of August. So I'd been thinking about I'd been thinking about quitting caffeine for probably a year. I got very serious about July. So I knew we were going camping in August. And where we go camping is off grid. Like we don't have any cell phone reception. We're in the middle of nowhere. We're at the river and we're tent camping, or some of our family members have trailers or campers that they bring. But my siblings and my sister and I and her fiance, who I was like, in my head, like, you don't know this, but in my head, I'm like, why did I just call her fiance my sibling? Probably because he feels like it in a way. Brother-in-law, soon to be brother-in-law. You know what I mean? So anyway, we all sleep in tents. And so I just always feel very like connected and tuned in when I'm there anyway. And I knew it would also be a break in routine. I wouldn't be going to a coffee shop because we're in the middle of nowhere. So it wouldn't be hard to say no because we all make our own coffee anyway. So even when I go there, I would like prior to me quitting caffeine, I would make like a big batch of cold brew and then just go get like some coffee creamer to keep in my cooler. And that's what I would do. I'm like, so I'd heard of this, coffee alternative called Dandy Blend. And Dandy Blend, I heard like a lot of people that I'd watched that had also quit caffeine, they said they really like the Dandy Blend because one, it kind of has the detox, the laxative, because dandelion detoxes our kidneys. So it kind of had that similar effect to caffeine, but it also had the bitterness of caffeine. And the thing that I didn't expect, but I think it helped my brain, was it's the same color as coffee and caffeine. So when I saw it in my drink, like it looked like I was drinking coffee. And I'm a very visual person. I'm a very visual learner. And so I think that visual cue actually did really help me. So prior to going camping, I went and got and I wanted to get like a really good dairy because I didn't want to just like have it watered down because I knew that would be hard. So I actually went and got goat milk and this Dandy Blend. And I was like, okay, if I need a little bit of honey, I did go get honey too. So I'm like, if I need a little bit of honey, but like that was my plan. And the first couple days, even camping, were rough, not necessarily because of the caffeine, I would say, but because of like everyone else was having it, like coffee, and it just sounded good. But whenever I felt like I was getting like a little bitchy or a little like irritated, we were right by the river. So I just went and jumped in the water, and like getting in the cold water will like wake you up. And so that was the first week. But what was interesting is when that was my first like few days of quitting caffeine. But what was interesting when we drove and left, and like that was the first thing I was like, oh my gosh, I really want like Starbucks. Because I do, unfortunately or fortunately, I do like Starbucks. And so I was like, okay. And I just went and made like an extra because that was the thing that really kept me going, is my sleep the whole time we were at camping was impeccable. Like I had just I slept in a tent a couple of nights, but I actually ended up, I really wanted to sleep under the stars, so I ended up making a bed in the back of my pickup truck, and I ended up, my dogs and I just ended up sleeping in the back of the truck. And so, and I didn't take, like, I wasn't planning on that, so I didn't like take a really good mattress or anything. So I ended up just like piling a bunch of sleeping bags. And I mean, so I wasn't necessarily, I can sleep anywhere. That is like a gift that I have. But it was still not a very comfortable place to sleep in per se. And I slept amazing. Not only did I sleep amazing, but I was the first one up. And this is like not a normal thing for me because I'd been struggling with insomnia. And so I'd been struggling with not being able to go to bed till 1, 2 in the morning and then not waking up, because from going to sleep that late, I would not wake up till like 10 or 11. And that was just like a really bad cycle that I was in. And I went from the first couple of days after quitting caffeine. And then I'm sure, like, again, we're camping in the middle of nowhere. So I also think like not being on our phones all the time, being like really out and connected to nature, it does reset our circadian rhythm. So I'm sure that helped too. However, obviously I'm not camping anymore, and I still am waking up naturally without an alarm between 6 and 7 every morning. So that is something that I'm recording this on, I'm just going to double check the date, October 22nd. I quit. I think I had my last, I think I left for camping August 4th. So the last time I had caffeine, other than the two kind of accidents I told you about with ordering a coffee, the matcha wasn't an accident. I very consciously wanted a matcha that day. So August 4th, and now today's October 22nd of 2025. So, other than the two times, and the 2 times that I did have caffeine, I couldn't fall asleep till 3 o'clock in the morning. So I have not had a matcha since. I wanted to experiment because, again, one of the goals that I've had in my entire life is I've always wanted to quit things from a balanced place. So when I was younger, I didn't drink, and I realized it was from a very unbalanced place. It was from, again, with kind of an ego and a place of pride of like, I come from a family of drinkers and a family of alcoholics. Therefore, I don't drink and I am better than you. Like, we act like that wasn't the attitude, but yes, that was the attitude. So I actually had started drinking, like not a lot, but I would go out and I would have drinks because I wanted to quit, not from a reaction to somebody else, but from an internal choice. And it was after I would drink a little bit that I was like, I just actually don't like the way my body feels on this. So I'm just not going to drink. And so again, I wanted to quit for my reasons and not because like everybody else was doing it. So, that was something really cool. Even again, I'm sure being connected to nature, being out literally in nature helped with my sleep, but those are some side effects of quitting caffeine that have lasted. Since quitting caffeine is my sleep is a lot deeper. I wake up between 6 and 7 without an alarm, which is just a really nice bonus because I hate waking up with an alarm. Like there's just nothing more rude than just being asleep and having just a jolt you awake. To me, it's just like so mean. It's just like not good on the nervous system for me. So that's been a really cool bonus of being able to wake up that early without an alarm. And so that was like the first week. But then when I got back, like that's what really got interesting, because when you're on vacation, like you don't have to force like anything, right? You're just chilling. Your job is to chill. We would tube. We went out on the knee board a couple of times. We went out on the wakeboard a couple of times. But when you're on vacation, like your job is just to chill. So I wasn't having to like make myself do anything because I didn't have to do anything other than chill and eat, which don't don't tempt me with a good time. And so then we get back, and that is when the urges for caffeine really started to set in, because had to like grapple with the fact of how much stuff I hated doing that I was using caffeine to force myself to get through. Like caffeine felt like the carrot on the stick of like, okay, I don't want to do this thing, but I'm going to force myself to do it. And essentially, like, obviously, there's things in life that we have to do that we don't want to do. But this is where the slap in the face really started to come in with how miserable I was. And I was using caffeine as a scapegoat to hide my misery. But the interesting thing is, and with the work I do with like emotional trauma with both myself and with other people, is our body signal for a very specific reason. And so misery becomes a signal that, hey, you're in the wrong place and you need to do something about it. And I realized that I was using caffeine to bypass my misery. And the problem with that is, okay, now I'm not getting the signal that I need to change something in my life, because all pain receptors are a signal that something needs to change. And when we numb or bypass those pain signals, we don't actually change. And so pain isn't a bad thing. And I'm not talking about like the pain and grief and like sadness and stuff like that, just in the pain of like shame or guilt or misery. These are these signals. The purpose of these emotions is to get us to change. And so I get back from vacation and I'm in the middle of my workday and I'm like, oh my gosh, I am miserable and I can't go get caffeine to just make myself feel better. And the first 2 weeks after that were super hard because, again, it was disconnecting me from my body. It was disconnecting me from all these signals. And now I had to face that. I had to face these uncomfortable emotions of misery, but I also had to face the fact that I was using something to bypass these signals and disconnect myself from my body even more. And so the first 3 weeks after I got back from vacation were actually, they were rough, not in the fact that after the first 2 weeks, I genuinely didn't want caffeine because my sleep was so good and I love sleep. I love sleep. I love naps. I love sleep. And so getting my sleep back to that good was enough of a reason to not want caffeine. Like even, because sometimes our body doesn't want something or our brain does, or our brain doesn't want something, but our body does. And so my brain was like, caffeine, we can go get a caffeine, coffee, 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 coffee. And my body was like, absolutely not. I want to get good sleep tonight. And that was enough for me to not want coffee. Like that's the cool thing is on this other side, I genuinely don't want caffeine because I like having that smooth energy and I like not having a hard time falling asleep. Like I love getting good sleep. So I'm at a point now, which is really cool. And I didn't think I would be at this point where I genuinely don't want caffeine. And so after the first few weeks, I was already starting to get there. Like, okay, I'm sleeping really good. I don't want caffeine. The hardest part was I wanted caffeine to, again, start to bypass these misery signals. And so that was like the hard part of me reconciling, like, oh my gosh, I've been ignoring my body. I help people with emotional work, and yet I'm using this thing to bypass and disconnect with my emotions. And now I have to reconcile with that. And so that was a very interesting experience of, okay, this is where we're at. But then it's also really cool to see like how good That's the one. And this was another reason that I wanted to record this episode today. I also wanted to record it for me because now I want to start getting off sugar. And before I quit caffeine, it felt like such an impossible feat. Like this felt like something like this isn't possible. And now it feels so easy. And I'm wanting to do the same thing with sugar. And again, I'm getting in that mindset of like, oh my gosh, this is so difficult. How am I going to do this? And I wanted to record this episode also to remind me is maybe the first week or two is really difficult, but then it actually, as you build the habit and as you get to feeling better with or without this thing, like it actually can get really easy. And so I wanted to record this episode for you again to have like, how I did it, why I did it, and just to start laying these factors out to see if maybe quitting caffeine is right for you. But I also wanted to do it to inspire myself of like, okay, this is how great you feel without caffeine as this drug and this stimulant. Let's see how you also feel without, caffeine or for sugar without this drug and stimulant in your body. And so I also wanted to record this episode as like a little like we can do it for both you and me in different like areas of our life because I do love not having caffeine in my system. I do love not having that stimulant and like feeling jacked up in caffeine. But also, the other cool thing that since now that I'm not bypassing that signal of misery, and I'll do a separate podcast episode on this at some point, but now that I'm not bypassing that misery signal, I realize like, if I want to do something, how do I create that excitement and how do I create that interest? So even with like this show, the idea of like having, and I know today's episode is a cross-posted episode, but having the Western Hippie podcast where I can really just build out master classes versus having the Miss Michaela Mae show where I can just be random and, talk about whatever. And feel like those brands are really solid on their own foundation. That made me so excited. Like I had thought about starting this podcast for a long time, but because I was bypassing those signals, I was hyper focusing on what I didn't want to do instead of sitting with the misery and thinking like, what would genuinely make me excited to like go do? And because I quit that, like here we are a couple weeks in to me recording podcasts again, and it feels amazing. And so this is like something that I need to do with myself with sugar as well. And one thing I just want to inspire you to think about with caffeine is to think about what you're gaining and not what you're losing. So like even for me with this sugar right now, I'm thinking about like what I'm losing and not what I can potentially gain. Like it's interesting because I actually did do a sugar detox prior to quitting caffeine. And then when I went to go quit caffeine and then we were camping, I'm like, I'm going to need some honey, and honey might be something I might actually not fully eliminate on my sugar detox, but my sleep did get really amazing. And so now it's like, okay, imagine how much more sleep you are going to get. And from that sleep, like how much more natural energy you're going to have. And that's where I think, and that's another thing I didn't really talk about, but I haven't had as much like, the like tremor, anxiety, or the like panic, like since quitting caffeine. And I think, whether it's the caffeine directly or whether it's because when we get more sleep, our body can repair and restore better, or whether it's a little bit of both, I don't really know. But I definitely think us getting adequate sleep and, quitting caffeine, helping us get that adequate sleep, I think that, just improves every area of life. And so actually, that's the question I'm going to leave us both with today, but I'm going to apply it to sugar is by, and I don't even want to say like eliminating, but by choosing something other than this, or like by like putting this on the sidelines, like maybe not even quitting, but like putting this on the bench or putting this on the sideline, like what do I gain by that? Because even with like sugar, one of the things I've been working on, because I'm getting ready to pull it out, and I always do like a little bit of a lead in, if you will, before I quit something. And I realized like, oh, I'm using sugar and it gives you such the brain high that I'm actually not eating enough protein. So how can I start adding more protein to every meals? And then I'm slowly like, oh, what can I add in instead of what can I take away? So then when I take this thing away, it's like not really a big deal. And then, yeah, let's just all take a moment today and focus on, okay, if I want to remove this thing, what am I gaining by removing this thing? Because that's what makes it so hard to quit, right? We think about removing this thing and we just think about what we're losing and not what we're actually gaining. So that's the question I'm going to leave us all with today, is by removing this thing, whether it be sugar, caffeine, alcohol, or something else in your life that you're thinking about, not what am I losing, but what am I gaining? So thank you for listening to this episode of the Miss Michaela Mae Show and the Western Hippie Podcast. I am Miss Michaela Mae, here with my corgis Tank and Willie. And if you found value out of this episode, I would just be so honored if you would rate, review, and subscribe wherever you're listening. And if you feel so called to leave a review, I would love to hear what you found valuable about the show, but also what you would love to hear more of. Until next time, I'm your host, here with my corgis, and we will talk to you soon.